This is Fat to Fierce. Welcome to the Confidence Chronicles. I'm your host, Amy English. Join me on this empowering adventure towards a healthier relationship with food, body, and self, one delicious bite at a time. Hey there. So, question for you. Do you ever find yourself mindlessly snacking, especially after a long and tiring day? Maybe snacking while scrolling social media or watching TV? Listen, we've all been there. Today's episode is about finding more pleasure and joy throughout your day and how doing that will help you improve your relationship with food and begin to eat more mindfully. So first, I'm going to take a minute and talk about emotional eating. I've shared this on some of the previous episodes. Just going to take a second and recap. We turn to food because it fills a void. That void can represent feelings of loneliness, boredom, stress, or any other unaddressed emotion. Eating temporarily distracts negative feelings while enhancing positive ones. And what I mean by that, eating can temporarily distract the negative feeling of, say, stress, because that's a common one. So it'll distract the feeling of stress while enhancing a more positive feeling like comfort or like peace, right? When we're stress eating, we're getting that hit of comfort, that hit of peace. And it distracts us from the negative feeling of stress. And what happens is this becomes a habit that strengthens over time. It even starts to blend into everyday life. And that leaves us feeling like we have no control. Do you know what I mean? Emotional eating turns into something you just do. It's almost as if it's on autopilot. And in our minds, it becomes a way of being, something we can't control or change. How often do we hear people say things like, I'm a stress eater, oh, I'm just an emotional eater? It becomes part of our identity. And then folks stay stuck on a hamster wheel with food, repeating the same behaviors over and over without understanding why. And when we're stuck in that hamster wheel, there's a train of thoughts that become so familiar. Thoughts like, there's something wrong with me. I have a problem with food. I can't stop. These cravings are just too strong. And one of my old classics, I have no willpower. If I had $1 for every time I said that over the years, these thoughts only add fuel to the fire, which keeps the hamster wheel spinning. And then it feels like we're on this endless loop. Does any of this sound familiar? This was my life for a really long time with food. But the good news is you can totally change this. It doesn't have to be this way. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the role of food in our lives, because this is where it can get a little sticky. Food is undeniably a source of pleasure. It connects us socially and culturally, and it just tastes good. It's no surprise that food is a frequent topic of conversation and celebration. It's kind of front and center at most events. Food is always there, and people like to talk about it. The challenge is when food becomes the primary source of pleasure and joy. Relying on food for every emotion, like stress, sadness, boredom, or even reward, can complicate our relationship with eating. Now, there are several pieces to help solve the emotional eating puzzle. For the sake of today's episode, we're talking about adding non-food related forms of pleasure to the day. For a long time, food was my pleasure, and it was also an escape. Eating was my go-to. Whether it was after a stressful day at work or if I received bad news, like when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I talk about that in one of the previous episodes too. Or if there was a dreadful work task that I just didn't want to complete, or looking for something fun to do to relieve boredom, food was the go-to. And in a way, emotional eating kind of became my hobby. I found happiness and joy in a half gallon of ice cream or a bag of chips. In order to shift the habit that I had with food, I had to be willing to find other sources of pleasure or joy. Sprinkling more pleasure and joy throughout the day, it does multiple things. First, it creates an opportunity to take intentional action. And that makes you more aware of your choices. That awareness is key. And choosing to do something different is very powerful. Just a few minutes ago, I talked about one of the thoughts that continues to fuel the hamster wheel, the thought that I have no control or I can't change this. By choosing something different, you're practicing taking back your power. This puts you in the driver's seat and behind the wheel of your journey. Next, pleasure, it just helps alleviate stress. It feels better. Now, this isn't to say you're never going to feel stress again. Stress is a very real human emotion. But sprinkling in more pleasure, it's going to help balance it. When I think about my life before I discovered, overcoming emotional eating, I was constantly stressed. Stressed with work, stressed with family, stressed with all the things, right? And I didn't have any other outlets. So eating was the go-to. And all that did was create more stress because then I was mad at myself for always, overindulging, overeating, emotional eating, and even binge eating. So finding other ways to sprinkle in more pleasure and more joy is just going to help balance that and offer another outlet. Finding pleasure offers more variety and helps to shift the focus away from food. And this, by the way, includes cravings. At some point, I will do an entire episode about cravings, but for now, I'll just say, I'll invite you to consider the next time you have a strong craving for a specific food, check in and ask yourself what you're feeling in the moment and what feeling you're looking for. Like what feeling you're looking for that food that you're craving to create. That can be pretty fascinating. Okay, bottom line, more pleasure and joy absolutely helps contribute to a healthier relationship with food and with eating. So how do we do this? How do we add more pleasure and joy to our daily lives? This is where self-care is going to come into play. So if you're someone who struggles with finding the time and ways to practice self-care, this next piece is for you. Ultimately, the idea is to start choosing actions and activities that feel better. We're looking for pleasure that doesn't involve food and eating. And I want to be clear, we are not anti-food. That's not what this is about. We just want to find other options, more variety. So we can start by finding pleasure and joy in the everyday activities. I'm talking about the simple things. Examine your current environment and the activities that you're already doing to see what feels delightful, because you may already be doing things that feel joyful, but you're just not noticing them. Again, this is where awareness comes into play. I remember when I first started doing this, when I was first introduced to the idea of adding more pleasure to my day, there were so many things I was already doing that felt like joy. And I just had to shift the perspective. I just had to be willing to notice it. Like feeling the sun on my face, going for a walk in my neighborhood. For a long time, I thought that walking was silly and not really a form of exercise. Oh, I was wrong. I was very wrong about that. The level of joy I feel when I walk outside, oh, it feels so good. There's a lovely VR exercise program that I do, and every time I perform it, it just feels amazing. That's pleasure, that's joy. It could be, reading a book or listening to music that you love. Listening to the rain. Oh my goodness. I know some people will think it's bizarre, but I just enjoy the sound of rain. In fact, I have a little sound box on my nightstand that is different rainstorms and thunderstorms and things like that. And I put it on before I go to sleep, and it helps me fall asleep. And it's just a really peaceful, joyful sound for me. So things like that. Notice who you're following on social media. I should say who and what you're following on social media, because it can be the Wild West over on social media, and there's all kinds of things. And so it's really helpful to find people and channels that feel good, that feel better, that offer, inspiration. That's going to help to increase your pleasure and joy as well, as opposed to following things that leave you feeling deflated and sad and frustrated and things like that. This is just another way where you can kind of choose what you want to pay attention to and pay attention to the things that feel better. So there's a couple of client examples that have stayed with me over the years, and so I want to share them here. I had one client once who just decided to set her alarm 5 minutes earlier in the morning so that she could spend that extra 5 minutes in the shower. For her, that was a way to sprinkle in more pleasure to her morning routine. And that's also a fun thing to do, to just focus on the different segments of your day, like morning. What can you do to add more pleasure to your morning routine? What can you do to add more pleasure to your afternoon? So on and so forth. It can be an easier way to look at it, and a way to just kind of like break up the day and break up the activities. Another one that I heard once, which just really, it helped me realize that this brought me joy too. Someone had said, turning over the pillow at night to feel the cool side of the pillow. When I first heard that, it was like butter. I was like, oh my goodness, yes, I love to do that. Again, this was something I do most nights, but hadn't really considered it as joyful or as pleasure. And it absolutely brings pleasure. So that's part of the bedtime routine, flipping over the pillow to feel the cool side. It's glorious. This is the simple stuff I'm talking about. Just noticing what feels good. I'll share two more. So, and these are mine. So I have two kids who are in high school, and I pick them up after school in the car rider line, and that car rider line can be long. And so what I started doing to make it just a little bit better in the afternoon is by putting on an audiobook as I sit there and wait. And as I sit in line, I'll listen to, an audiobook. And I'm a self-improvement junkie, as many life coaches are. So I'm usually listening to something related to that. So that's what I'll listen to as I'm waiting. And it just feels good. Another one. So we have Publix here where I live. It's a grocery store. And our local Publix has two ways to get home. There are two ways to get back to my house. One way is very busy, very congested with lots of traffic, but it's shorter. The other way is less congested, but it's longer. I will always take the longer route home because it is less stressful. It is less busy, less congested. It is more peaceful. It's just like a kind of like a peaceful, quiet country drive home, even though it takes like a few extra minutes. For me, it's worth it because it feels better. Some other examples of ways to sprinkle in pleasure throughout your day, pleasure and joy. Spending time in nature. If you're someone who likes to take walks outside, or maybe you like to garden, right? Engaging in hobbies, painting, playing music, reading, whatever you like to do. Connecting with loved ones. So phone calls, Zoom calls, game nights. That's something fun we used to do a lot more often than we do now with teenagers. But every once in a while, we'll play Monopoly or Sorry, and my kids are cutthroat. But it's still a lot of fun. That's something that brings joy and pleasure. Also, listening to them play music. Both of my kids are musicians and play multiple instruments, and just listening to them practice really brings joy. It's a delight to listen to. So on trying a new activity, right? Here's the other thing. Allowing this to be an experiment. Trying a new activity, learning a new skill to see if you like it, to see how it feels. Could be like taking a dance class, learning a new language, learning how to decorate cakes. P.S. That's a fun one. I'm a really good cupcake decorator. I did a Wilton class several years ago, and that was so much fun. Again, now that could get a little tricky because it's cake. We are talking about emotional eating here. But like just the act of decorating the cupcakes is super fun. I don't do it often. At one point, I was going to have a cupcake business. Okay, that's another topic for a whole other day here. Let me not get off topic. All right. Hopefully you get the idea. Trying a new activity, learning a new skill, and just evaluating and noticing if it brought you pleasure, if it brought you joy, if it felt like fun, if it felt delightful. Do you want to do more of it? And if so, how can you sprinkle that in to your day, week, month, year? What's going to happen when you start doing this? Well, I can share based on what's happened with me and what's happened with my clients that I've worked with over the years. Number one, we just feel better. We feel better. Isn't that worth it? Number two, the focus or fixation on food begins to shift. So I have often described the feeling I used to have with food and with emotional eating and feeling out of control, almost like I was in a trance. And what happens when you start shifting the focus away from food and finding other things that feel good, sprinkling more joy and pleasure, is that trance begins to lift. It begins to break. And you start seeing where you do have control. And that leads me to number three. You just begin paying attention. And by paying attention, I mean, quite honestly, that alone will change everything. So this week, I would like to invite you to reflect on your own relationship with food and with pleasure. Consider if there's other activities that you could weave into your day, week, month, year, to experience more joy. And notice what activities you're already doing to experience more joy. And maybe try one new activity this week. Pick something. It could be anything. Keep it simple or try something like a little bit more elaborate. It's entirely up to you. It's up to you and it's up to your schedule. And it's up to what feels doable. This is very important too, okay? We want to take bite-sized pieces. I am using a food analogy as I talk about overcoming emotional eating. Listen, I'm aware of this, okay? But seriously, taking a chunk instead of trying to like pick something, pick some grand big activity that's just going to keep getting sidelined. No, you want to pick something that's doable that you could do tomorrow. Maybe it is, getting up an extra 2 minutes earlier so you can spend that time in the shower. Or maybe it's taking a shower at night. That's another one of my examples. I love taking a shower at night. I don't know. There is just something so delightful about showering in the evening and hopping into bed, fresh, clean sheets after showering. I don't know what it is. It's just something that really brings me joy. So there you go. Another example. But yes, the idea is to pick actions that feel doable for you based on your life and your schedule. We don't need to add overwhelm to this equation. That's important. Okay. Let me just take a minute to talk about the takeaways from today's episode. Adding more joy and pleasure feels better. It helps to shift the focus, the continuous focus from food. It's a great way to manage and balance stress, and it improves your mood. Ultimately, adding more joy and more pleasure to your day will help lead to a healthier relationship with food and help to change the eating habits. I hope you have fun with this and have a great week. Are you ready to take control of your eating, embrace your body, and boost your confidence? Then let's get fierce. Start your Fat to Fierce journey today. Go to amyenglishcc.com for more resources and to book your discovery call.